that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I wonder hope gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello everybody. This is Energy Week with George Harvey and Tom Finnell. I am George Harvey. This is Tom Finnell.
I am Tom Finnell.
And if Tom looks like he's in a daze, it's because he's staring at the monitor. It's because he's staring at a monitor, trying to do the engineering while the show is in operation. If I look like I'm in a daze, it's because I am. So we'll start out. The first. These are news items I found looking at news on an everyday basis. I keep news at a blog called geoharvey.wordpress.com, and I also write for Green Energy Times, and between them I come across quite a lot of news during the course of a week, and so I collect it and give it to you over the TV wires. So we're starting on the 2nd of May with an announcement from Green Mountain Power. I got this from the Barre Montpelier Times-Argus. Green Mountain Power has announced it will use a planned solar farm at the former Rutland City landfill to test battery technology that would allow it to store power generated at peak times and release it into the grid as needed. So it sounds like they're building this into, I don't know. The article made it sound like they are testing this with a view to looking at microgrids.
Well, I didn't read that out of the article, but the technology is something they're trying all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
You link to something in New York State where they're setting up a big program. Mm-hmm. Well, they got money, you know, to do exactly this.
Yeah.
And energy storage, basically it's key. Wind and solar are not 24-hour sources.
Yeah.
But they're pretty prolific when they're working, so if you can store them, you save it and store it until you need it.
Right.
You could get rid of fossil fuel.
You could get rid of nuclear too with stuff that's cheaper.
Nuclear.
In fact, there's a story coming up.
It's moving in this direction,
yeah,
no matter what we do, because it's just going to make economic sense.
Right.
And storage technology is one of them.
Yep.
You talk about, well, this one talks about batteries, and they're just taking a bunch of conventional batteries and putting them all together in a big building.
Right.
But then they're working on battery technology.
Right. There's a couple of technologies that are interesting. The liquid flow batteries are really...
Liquid flow batteries. I got something about that.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get into that later.
We can get into that a little bit.
Everybody, watch this show because liquid flow batteries are cool.
And over in New York State, just near North Adams, they have not a centrifuge, a flywheel.
Flywheel, right.
Flywheel storage.
Yep.
Yeah,
and they've got...
down in Rhode Island was building a car.
With a flywheel?
Be run by a flywheel.
Man, I wouldn't want to be around if that got into an accident.
Unfortunately, he was playing golf one day and he dropped dead. So I don't think it had anything to do with flywheel.
Hopefully not.
Yeah. Dave Shea was a really clever guy, and he had a patent on making taffeta.
Taffeta.
Yeah, a fabric.
Yeah.
And he was rolling in dough for this.
Really?
Well, he inherited an old mill in New England from his folks.
Oh, okay.
And he turned it into a taffeta mill. And apparently there's not too many people in the country make taffeta.
Yes, okay.
And aside from fancy dresses for fancy events, taffeta is like Catholic priests use in their chasubles.
Okay.
Which is the big green thing they wear on the outside.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes it's red, but...
yeah.
So I guess there's a big market for it, because there's a lot of Catholic churches
I had never thought of that.
Well, I learned that from him.
Yeah. By the way, everybody, Tom is a Unitarian.
So was Thomas Jefferson.
Well, I have nothing against that. Okay. Anyway, that came from the Barre Montpelier Times-Argus. And from Scientific American, we learned that Unit 3 at the Boundary Dam Power Station, and by the way, Boundary Dam, there may be hydro there, but this is about coal, in Saskatchewan, will switch on later this year after a lengthy refit. It will be the first time a commercial scale plant supplying electricity to the grid captures and stores a large fraction of its carbon dioxide emissions.
There's a picture of Boundary Dam up there now. It's big. That's a big plant.
Is there Tom, I think we're off kilter there. Oh, it's that little picture.
It's a little
on the
picture,
left.
yeah.
Okay. Is there a dam there? It looks like there's a lake in the background.
Well, this Boundary Dam is the name of the vicinity.
Okay.
So I don't know the history of that, but this station is coal.
Okay, so the coal stacks are there.
It's probably some sort of a lake. It's probably also used for cooling.
Okay.
But that's not part of the...
Coal uses more water for cooling than nuclear does.
Does it really?
Yeah. That's something I came across.
But that's not the story here. The story is they're saving the CO2.
The CO2, but does it say what they're doing with it?
Unfortunately, it does. They're selling it to an oil company that's using it to get more oil out of the ground.
Yeah, this is smart. Yeah,
there are better things to do with CO2.
Yeah, and
one of which is to make Pepsi Cola.
Or beer. But this CO2 is going to make its way up to the surface at some point.
Well, I don't see how you're going to keep it. You're not going to put it down there, but it's going to seep out.
There's a way to keep it if you can get it deep enough, because it only takes 6 atmospheres to liquefy it.
So if you get it deep enough, it will self-liquefy.
If you get it underwater, something like that, far enough down, if there's enough pressure on it, it will liquefy, and hopefully it will stay liquid. But of course, the problem with this is, if there's any leaks there, the liquid will get into the water that's nearby. And if the water moves, it's going to get out. So you need to have a pretty good seal, even though it's a liquid. Anyway,
there's better things to do with that CO2, and in basically some form make it back into carbon.
You can make it into carbon, you can make it into plastics, you can make it into fuel for cars, you can make it into all kinds of things. Yeah. It all requires a certain amount of work, and there's a lot of research that has to be done on that. But one of the things that I find interesting about this is we've heard a lot about carbon capture and sequestration, and this is the first time they're actually doing it. So
is this really the first time?
It says it's the first time on a large scale.
Oh, okay, on this scale.
Yeah, on this scale. And I've read that the carbon capture itself is not a big deal. In fact, I've read that it costs $7.50 a ton to capture carbon dioxide.
I read something about it in your link, and it is. It's pretty simple.
Yeah. Well, it dissolves in water, and then you can get it out of the water. It dissolves if it's under pressure, and you can move it around as a liquid. So people are accustomed to this because it's in the CO2 fire extinguishers. That CO2 fire extinguisher is full of liquid, and it'll produce an awful lot of gas.
Okay.
And so on we go. The Australian network operators have begun to accept new technologies, mostly centered around localized renewable generation, energy storage, and some smart software, are a better and cheaper option than just putting up more poles and wires. And this from Renew Economy. In other words, it's cheaper to go off grid, even if you're a whole town. And if you're far enough from the grid, it's cheaper just to be off grid than to bring the grid in.
I did read about this. I don't think I copied anything down, but Australia is a vast country.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of people.
Yeah.
So when you get out into the outback, the distance between people is large.
Yep.
And back in the 20th century, or ancient history, there was a large program to electrify these people. Mm-hmm. And since everybody's like 5 or 10 miles apart, they were running miles and miles and miles and miles of poles with basically nobody even using them.
Low voltage wires, I would imagine.
Well, we're not talking transmission lines. These are maybe 15,000 volts.
Yeah, which sounds like a lot, but it isn't really.
Not in the world of transmission.
Right, and with the transmission line losses, that would have a very high transmission line.
It was costing them.
Yeah.
Everything about it was costing them.
Yeah.
And they're finally coming around to the realization that it's not cost effective.
Right, and as a matter of fact, I have known a couple of people in Vermont One of them lived in Guilford. Another one now lives in Bradford and is the editor of Green Energy Times. And these are people who had property that was not on didn't have electricity going by it. And in one case, it would cost $30,000 to bring in the electric supply. So
That's not strange in Vermont,
yeah.
really.
So why bring in the electric supply when for $30,000 you can make your own electricity
Absolutely.
and store
And
it?
that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
Australia, this was a government program. It was, it was back like we had programs like it in the 30s, and it electrified America.
Yeah.
And this electrified Australia.
Yeah.
But that program's over now.
Long since.
And so now the utility companies are looking at it and saying, this is, as I said, not cost effective.
It's not cost
What's
effective.
going to save us money? And the answer is microgrids, localized storage.
Yep.
Now, I haven't read whether they're ultimately interconnected or not.
Yeah.
It would make sense that they would be, but that would be like phase 2.
Yes. And it would make sense that they could be if they're close enough together. But in Vermont, they could be close enough together. But in Australia, you can have a long ways between towns.
Yeah, Vermont compared to Australia is
A different place. Yeah, there are places in Australia that look like Vermont, by the way.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Really green and lush, but not many. Okay. On the 3rd of May, we had two stories that came in together, both in Clean Technica, and both relating to the same thing. The first is, according to the International Monetary Fund, when you factor in implicit subsidies from failure to charge for pollution, climate change, and other externalities, the post-tax cost of support for fossil fuels comes in at $2 trillion a year for the world. And about 3/4 of that amount is the damage that the fossil fuels do.
Like health damages.
Health damage is one, climate change damage is another. There's a lot of stuff that goes wrong. As a matter of fact, I remember there's a school in New Jersey called Del Barton. I think it's a Catholic school, and they had statues. When I was a kid, they took all those statues out, they were made of marble, and replaced them with casts made from them that were made of cement. And the reason was because they could do things with that cement to prevent it from being hit by acid rain. That acid rain is doing damage. The damage is from the fossil fuel industry. The streams in Vermont that you can fish in, but you got to throw the fish back because you can't eat fish with that much mercury in it.
And there's science by some of the rivers.
Yeah, that mercury got there from the coal industry. So, what's the cost of a ruined stream or river in Vermont? What's the cost of the destruction of the old buildings in Venice? Same thing.
Or even the damage to the paint in your car.
Yes, absolutely. Your cars would last longer, folks, if you didn't allow... Switch to fossil fuels, your cars will last longer. Of course, they'll be electric, but that's okay.
I'm just thinking of the paint. Yeah.
Okay.
When I was in Rhode Island, there was a big flap over cars losing their paint.
Yeah.
And they thought it was the local utility, and it turned out not to be. It was the Ohio River.
Yep. The second of these two is the fossil fuel industry faces a loss of $28 trillion in revenues over the next 2 decades if the world takes action to address climate change, cleans up pollution, and moves to decarbonize the global energy system, according to the European brokering house Kepler Chevreux. Now, the interesting thing about these two is that the loss to the fossil fuel industry, about 38% almost of that loss is loss of subsidies that we are paying them for no particular reason, except that we want them to be in business when they're costing us $2 trillion a year. And the amount, if you just do the little calculations that are involved in this, you can see that the amount of damage that's done by the fossil fuel industry exceeds their revenue.
Wow.
Okay?
This is the way we've always done things.
That's right.
I mean, when the country was young and you had some trash, you threw it in the river.
That's right. Absolutely.
And this is just magnified.
I can remember
I got this gas. Well, the Earth can take care of it. We'll just
we can dump plutonium in the Pacific Ocean.
And nobody's sitting there saying, well, this is a subsidy.
Yes. Yes. One of the best books I've ever read was a book called Garbage, and it was about the history of trash in the United States and how in the 1930s, in order to get the economy going again, everybody started to get convinced that it's better to make something and have it thrown away so that it's just made again. And we're still in that.
We're definitely in that, yeah.
So, the cars at one time were made to last forever. Houses were made to last forever. There is a Benson Woodworking, which is not far from here. It's in Walpole, New Hampshire. They make houses to a standard that they say should last a minimum of 200 years.
No kidding.
No kidding. And these are well, they're timber frame, and Ted Benson was he was one of the pioneers of the new timber frame movement. But they're building houses that are zero energy ready. So that house, all you've got to do is add a few solar panels to it, and you're off and running, and you don't need any.
Well, up until, I guess, the middle of the 20th century, timber frame was a way to build a house.
That's right.
You look up and down, say,
middle of the
Western
19th,
Avenue.
actually. Middle of the 19th century.
You look up and down Western Avenue with all these old houses. You don't realize it by looking at the outside, but they're timber frame houses.
Which means that they're basically the same kind of construction that the Tudor houses were in England in the 70s.
Some of these houses are 200 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've lived in a number of houses that were timber framed, including actually one place that I lived once was an old abbey that dated to the 13th century. And
sounds like fun.
It does. We had windows that were about this wide, okay, and the window sill was about 6 feet deep, and the windows went out so that the archers could shoot out.
Okay.
You couldn't shoot at them.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, we should keep going with this show because otherwise we're going to be talking all afternoon. Okay, on the 4th of May, we found this. Nearly half, actually 44%, of the Earth's new electric production comes from renewable resources, such as wind, solar, and water power. With costs declining, renewables grow even though investments into renewable energy production decreased 14% in 2013. So again, we're seeing the amount going in growing, even though the investment is decreasing. The price is going down. It's putting pressure on conventional power sources. And but this is my guess in the United States for sure. I think in the United States for sure we're going to have more than 50% of our new power in 2014 coming from wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, and biomass.
50% of the new power in 2014.
That's what I'm saying.
I think that's very
conservative.
Yeah, probably conservative. It's still a drop in the bucket, though, because there's still a lot of old power out there.
There is, but all of that old power has to be replaced. And if we draw a line and say at this point we're not going to allow any new coal plants, any new natural gas plants, if we just draw that line, then those plants are all going to go away because they're getting old.
Well, I don't think the line is going to be drawn because it's politically unpopular.
Well,
but at least as far as the coal is concerned,
yeah,
the cost of a new coal plant is going to mitigate against them building new ones.
Yes,
Natural
absolutely.
gas is still
absolutely.
going to be cheap for a while.
Yep.
But only for a while.
Yep.
But coal and oil are heading for oblivion just because they're going to be too expensive.
Yeah, the motto of my website, the geoharvey.wordpress.com website, is, if it isn't sustainable, then its condition is terminal. And that's just...
That's a good thought.
It's a truism, though.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Mile for mile. I think I skipped something here. Yes, I did. Okay. Still on the 4th, a federal judge has ruled in favor of the 468 megawatt Cape Wind project following a legal challenge. This is the 26th legal challenge.
They're still fighting that, huh? Sounds like Benghazi.
Yeah, right. 26th legal challenge the project has faced, all of which failed. The judge said, and I quote, "There comes a point at which the right to litigate can become a vexatious abuse of the democratic process," end quote. This is the one that Ted Kennedy was fighting.
Yeah, the
against.
Kennedys have fought completely.
I have
fought all of them.
There was somebody else. Who was it? Fought against this, and he was a famous person. And after a while, he changed his position. He was the spokesperson for the movement against it, and he withdrew and said, "I'm not going to allow people to use my image anymore." To the anti-wind.
This rings a bell. I've heard this.
I forget who that was.
I don't remember who it is either, but the story rings a bell.
Now there's another thing too to bear in mind here, and that is among the backers of this project, the people who have come out in favor of it, is the Massachusetts Audubon Society.
I've heard that too.
And the work that was done studying birds and wind before the project is really fascinating, because what they show is they had radar that was so sensitive that you could actually tell what the species of the bird was on the radar screen.
No kidding.
For some species, certainly not all, because the different species have flight characteristics that are different, and they tracked these birds going through a wind project, not Cape Wind, but it was through a wind project, and they found that what the birds were doing as they migrated was they saw a channel between rows of wind turbines, and they just flew right between the wind turbines for the length of the wind project. Because the turbines are half a mile apart, so there's lots of room between them. And they knew as they approached that project, they didn't want to be near those
I could
blades.
see that. It'd be intuitive. They wouldn't even think
Even
about
a bird brain isn't stupid. Okay. In 2007, solar panels were still in Massachusetts here. Throughout Massachusetts could generate 3 megawatts of power. This is 2007. 3 megawatts, enough for a little less than 500 homes. Now the total is 475 megawatts.
Okay.
From 2007 to 2014, it went from 3 to 475, enough for more than 230,000 homes, and by 2020, state officials want to see 1,600 megawatts. The history of solar power in Massachusetts is absolutely fascinating. They have at least one solar project in every municipality in Massachusetts.
That's interesting.
Isn't it?
I have read something to that effect. These little towns all have a solar project.
They all have solar projects, which are in, I think, most cases probably private projects that people own, but at their own homes. Okay. On the 5th of May, we found this. For the first time, this is kind of chilling, for the first time in at least 800,000 years, might be much more than that, the average level of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere exceeded 400 parts per million for the full month of April. Measurements made at a NOAA observatory in Hawaii showed that the monthly average for April reached 401.33 parts per million. That from Blue and Green Tomorrow.
I think this would be a good point for me to try and do my video, because that's exactly what it is.
Okay, let's look at your video.
Well, first I'm going to
Do you have a video that's
click
actually
into
there?
this.
Ah, there you go. Look at that. What is that?
These are 2 slides from the video.
Oh, okay.
The one on the left is modern day. The one on the back goes back to the beginning of the 1800s.
Okay.
And the video itself, which I should be able to pull up down here, it's not going to be centered on the screen, but I think you
Well,
can
we'll
see
apologize for that and do it anyway.
it. Yeah, I think you'll see it here. Can you see that? It's a little bit dark, isn't it?
The video, I can see things moving on that chart. Is that what the video is?
Yeah, it's just, this is just the CO2 levels in the atmosphere,
Okay.
and it's in modern times. It starts at 1980. And as you can see, they're steadily climbing.
Right.
When we reach the present day, then they'll start going backwards.
Okay.
And it'll get a little bit easier to see. But that's just a straight line, steady climb. Now we're
Right.
going backwards. See on the left, they're compressing the time on the back.
Okay.
It's 19. Well, this is going back to the beginning of civilization.
To the beginning of civilization. So we've seen this is the hockey stick graph, is what it's called.
And now it's going back before civilization.
Okay.
And unfortunately, it's not showing up too well on the screen.
Well, that's all right. What we're seeing here is that there's definitely a spike in carbon dioxide level.
We're way higher now
than we've been
than
for.
we've ever been. And
Yeah.
that goes back
and
800,000 years.
yeah.
BC.
Now there's a thing where I've read that their carbon dioxide levels were higher, when the dinosaurs were around.
I don't think that's true. Not at least not according to that map.
Well, I'm questioning that myself because, for example, with a level that we've got now, the oceans are getting acidified, and as the oceans get acidified, things like snails are not able to maintain their shells. So we've got snails running around with really super thin or bad shells. If the levels were higher when the dinosaurs were around, why do we have fossils of shellfish from those periods? Because we would have expected those shellfish to have had an extremely difficult time trying to maintain their shells. So that's
we wouldn't have had shellfish. We'd have had something else.
well, there were shellfish from
Yeah, I
those
know.
times. Though.
So
Yeah.
that proves that there wasn't these high levels of CO2.
Well, it indicates. I don't know if it suggests. Yeah.
Proves is the wrong word.
Well, it proves it in one sense, the meaning of the word proof, but I think, okay. Let's see now. Same day, this is the 5th of May, New York State is proposing to turn its electric utilities into a new kind of entity that would buy electricity from hundreds or thousands of small generators and set prices for that electricity and for the costs of running the power grid. This is in the New York Times.
I've got something on that too.
Do you? Okay. Clearly what they're looking at here is everybody can make electricity. You can make lots of electricity, and let's just do it.
In the 1990s, this is a little bit of the history, the state pushed companies like Con Edison, which is the big New York City utility, to sell their generating stations to independent producers, which the same thing happened here with Yankee,
Yeah.
and to become primarily distribution entities. Now, they would become traffic cops in a two-way flow of power.
Right.
The new report predicts the gradual decline of big generating stations.
Yep.
In their place, the commission envisions rooftop solar panels, small wind turbines, small generating stations using natural gas to make both electricity and steam, which would be used for cooling and heating in their immediate area. Some of these generators would be linked in microgrids intended to stay afloat during a blackout. So
All of this
exactly what they're studying.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned this kind of stuff
Right.
many, many times in this show.
Right.
The underlying idea is that the existing system of regulation does not encourage the utilities or independent parties to produce a cleaner, more efficient energy grid. So that's what this is all about. This is trying to figure out how to encourage this kind of stuff
Right.
without forcing people to do it.
Right. And in the process, they're probably going to see prices go down, employment go up, taxes go up, revenues go up, loss to the economy go down, and basically we're entering a brave new world. Or at least maybe a better new world.
This is certainly the hope.
Yeah.
And it's realizable.
Yes, I think it is. I think it is indeed. The next item comes from Al Jazeera America.
Al Jazeera.
Yeah.
Yes. I know
Young
well.
people across the country are suing several government agencies for failing to develop a climate change recovery plan, conduct that amounts to a violation of their constitutional rights, says their lawyer, Julia Olson. Remember that name, Julia Olson. Guys, if you're young, this looks like a class action suit to me. You can get in there. This is, basically what we're doing today is we are selling the future of our children, and they're starting to get upset about it.
Well,
and I don't blame them.
It's a consciousness raising thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we've always been accustomed to, as I said earlier, you dump your trash in a river.
That's right.
And that's kind of a metaphor.
I
we're
don't
dumping our
think
trash
that's
wherever we can dump
Yeah,
it, whether
yeah.
it's physical trash or gas.
But in the past, we actually did dump our trash.
Oh, sure
in the
we
rivers.
did.
Yeah.
That's what rivers are for, isn't it? And now people are starting to realize that that's inappropriate. And they're starting to realize it in sufficient enough numbers that something will be done about it.
I think that's
And is being done.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Actually, and the movement to start dealing with this started with it started with Teddy Roosevelt. The whole business of bird sanctuaries was a Teddy Roosevelt decision. He wanted to protect.
Was it?
Yeah, he was told that there was a species of, I think it might have been a species of pelican in Florida that was under attack from hunters and was endangered. They didn't use the term endangered species in those days, but it was on federal land. And he said, "Can't we do something about this?" And his advisors said, "No, there's no law that says that we can do anything about it." And Roosevelt said, "Well, I'm the president of the United States.
I can do so.
I can do something about this. I can just put out an order saying nobody's allowed to hunt on that land."
Yeah.
And so they said, "Well, actually, that's true." And so he said, "Okay, that's what it is. This is a bird sanctuary. Nobody's allowed to hunt birds there." He was the guy who figured that one out. And Richard Nixon, who also was the guy who went to China, I think.
He did.
Yeah.
Nobody else could have done it.
Well, we had people from ping pong teams going too, but that was after him. He was also the president for the first Earth Day. And he was very much behind that. He and Gaylord Nelson, who was a U.S. Senator,
Interesting.
and was a Democrat. But Richard Nixon was the president of the United States who stood up and in a State of the Union message said, if we don't start dealing with the environment now, we won't ever be able to do it. And that's where the federal legislation on environmental protection came about. Now, obviously there were other reasons why we might think that Richard Nixon didn't really succeed all that well at his presidency, but I think that was important and long-lasting stuff that he did. And now we've got young people going out and saying, wait a minute, it's not just a river, it's the whole frigging world. So, the fact that I took this thing out of an Al Jazeera report because it was a good report. Al Jazeera has been doing good things with the news, and
Well, it's interesting.
It is.
They're, I guess, owned by the United Arab Emirates or Qatar. I think they're owned by.
Okay, I don't know that.
But the news is at least as objective as CNN.
I think it is.
Far more so than Fox.
Yeah, well, Fox has certainly got an agenda. Actually, I think most of these news media have got
Another
agendas.
interesting one is called Russia Today, which is supported by the Russian government, and that too is reasonably objective. Mm-hmm. I doubt that right now, under what's going on in Ukraine, it's very objective, but for the most part, it's been more so than our own.
Yeah. Okay, on the 6th of May, we got this one from the Huffington Post and all over the rest of the internet as well. Quote, and this is an opinion piece, the title is Revealed, Alex 2014 Attacks on the Environment, end quote. An internal tracking document obtained from ALEC by the Center for Media and Democracy, the Progressive Inc., under Texas Public Records Law reveals the scope of ALEC's anti-environmental efforts in 2014. And I downloaded their spreadsheet and I looked at it, and in just the 30 some odd items that I looked at, I saw that they were clearly meddling in the politics of Vermont. There's no doubt about this. One of the things that they targeted was a law that had Anthony Polino's name on it. And, it's like, these people, and it's, I don't know, they're claiming to do it because they're conservative and they believe in a free market. And you know what?
But this isn't a free
This
market.
isn't a free market.
We want a free market, but it's our free market.
That's right. We want to control the free market. Yeah, well, there's a little bit of hypocrisy there, maybe. The next one, also from the Huffington Post, is this. You got any pictures of Oklahoma? Mile for mile, there are almost as many earthquakes rattling Oklahoma as California this year.
I don't have any. How do you picture an earthquake?
Well, you picture the mess that it makes out of somebody's
Afterwards,
chimney.
Yeah.
Many researchers suspect deep injection wells used for the disposal of fracking wastewater could be causing the earthquake activity. This is
It's
the
happening in
Huffington.
Ohio too.
It's happening in Ohio too. And you know, this is stuff, it's also happened not just with fracking, but with hydro-shearing, which is what's used. It's a very similar process, but on a smaller scale, and it doesn't put chemicals into the ground. It's just cold water. But in the hydro-shearing, what they're doing is they're putting cold water down one pipe, and then it breaks up the rocks underground with the idea that the water they're stuffing down that pipe is going to come up through a second pipe that may be 100 yards away, and it's going to be hot. And there have been a couple of these. One of them was done in Switzerland, where they spent all the millions of dollars it was necessary to set up the power plant, and then they discovered when they got it going that they couldn't deal with the earthquakes.
It was causing earthquakes.
Yeah.
Interesting you mentioned that, and I don't have any pictures of it, but I read something, again, a link that you came up with.
Okay.
In the Salton Sea in California.
Yes.
And while there's plans to put up solar there, this isn't what we're talking about. Underneath the Salton Sea is a lot of hot rocks.
Yes.
This is not magma.
Yes.
It's hot rocks.
Yes.
And they call it geothermal.
Yes.
And they're going to be doing exactly the same thing.
right.
They're going to be running cold water down. They're going to be doing something like fracking down there,
Right.
bringing it back up to generate power.
Well, I think it's a good point maybe to tell people about geothermal. There's three different
Well,
things.
there's a lot
that
of
are-
kinds of
Yeah,
geothermal.
there's three important ones though.
Okay.
One of them is the geothermal that people will have for their own homes. And what you do there is you typically open up a piece of your lawn and bury a bunch of pipes, and then close it back up and replant your grass. Or you dig a couple of a well that goes down 100 feet or 300 feet or whatever, and you pump water down there, and it comes back up warmer.
Well, there is already hot water down there.
Yeah, but it all it's got to do is come up warmer. Because then what you're using is a heat pump to get the, okay, that is geothermal heating, and it has nothing to do with geothermal electric.
Okay.
Except that it's in the earth, and the earth is pretty big. The second kind of geothermal is the kind that they have done in the past in New Zealand and Iceland. And that kind of geothermal, you put a pipe in the ground, you pump the water down, it comes back up through another pipe, but it's just exposed to the heat of the ground, and that's hot enough to make it boil when it gets up to the surface again.
So this is where you have volcanic activity. This is magma.
This is from magma. And in fact, there's one of them in Iceland where they actually drilled into the magma, and the pipe goes right down into that glowing, viscous liquid rock, and that's just regular geothermal electric. The third kind of geothermal, which is the kind that we're talking about that causes earthquakes, although the regular geothermal does cause the earth to change a bit, and it is not a wonderful, not a perfect solution.
Well, I guess you can't screw around down there without something happening.
Yeah. The third kind is where, as I said, you pump cold water underground. It makes a bunch of rocks that are hot crack because they shrink a little bit, and then that produces openings so that a second well, which is some distance away, can pump that. You can get that water back up again, and it comes up very hot and boils when it gets to the surface. That kind can cause earthquakes, and that's the kind that I'm saying is not identical to, but it is somewhat similar to fracking. And of course, with fracking, you're talking about a huge area compared to this two pipes that are 100 yards apart or something. But interestingly enough, the DOE says that if Vermont Vermont has enough assets for us to produce something like 6 times as much power as we need from geothermal.
Just from geothermal?
Just from geothermal. Oh. I would advocate producing no more than about 10% at most, preferably more like 1%, just so we can get a feeling for whether this stuff is going to be acceptable. before we go into this. And the reason is because the solar assets that we've got are that we would be able to get 1,000%. If we developed our solar, if we developed 10% of our solar, we'd have all the power we need. And that, of course, would involve battery backup during the night, but it would give us all of our power. Wind, we've got more than 100% of what we need from wind. They have just doubled the estimate for hydro in the last, I think we talked about that last week. I talked to James.
The existing dams.
No, well, some of it is existing dams, yes.
That haven't been used.
And there are other things that haven't been tapped. And I talked to James Perkins about that, and he said, well, this is really everything. You know, this is a bunch of stuff that people really haven't talked about, including his high head, low flow scenario. But we've got assets, not including geothermal, that will bring us to well over 1,000%, about 1,200% of what we need.
That's Vermont.
That's just Vermont, which
and
is
the country as a whole does.
the country as a whole has better
much
assets
more than we
that.
need.
Yeah, New Hampshire, the assets in New Hampshire would cover a smaller percentage of their demand, but the reason is because they're a similar state with twice the population, so their demand is twice as great, but they can still get 5 times their demand. What are you looking at
I've
there?
got a picture of exactly that.
Oh, okay.
This is the geothermal energy. Let me. I gotta.
I'm the
which
geothermal
mouse am I
energy.
using? Okay, here we
Click
go.
on it, Tom.
Here we go.
There you go. Okay.
This is the geothermal potential in America.
Okay. And you can see there's a little bit there in Vermont. And there's a lot out there out west. Wow,
boy.
and there's some in South Dakota. Who would have known? And look at that in northern Louisiana and southern Arkansas. Wow.
Yeah.
But look at the west. I mean, that looks
There's
like
a little bit
bowl
New
full of
Hampshire
cherries.
up there. Looks like around Mount Washington.
Right.
And it isn't on that map, but somewhere around Chester, there's a small section of homes that were built, I think, in the 30s or the 20s.
Yeah.
That are all geothermal heated from just drilling wells down deep, and there's hot water down there, and they're pumping them back up.
Isn't that fun?
Maybe a dozen homes, maybe 20.
Yeah. I think that's nice. And of course, that's the home heating type of geothermal, which does virtually no damage. And in fact, you don't even have to go into the ground for that if you live next to a river or a
Well,
pond.
there's a new form of geothermal making its presence known in Vermont called air source geothermal.
Air source heat pumps, not geothermal. Air source heat
Okay,
pumps.
they're not. Well, they are because it's using the heat of the earth. But yeah.
Well, no,
but it's the heat of the air.
There's geothermal heat pumps. Wait a minute. You got two things confused there. There's a geothermal heat pump and there's an air source heat pump. And the air source heat pump is like an air conditioner, except that
Or a refrigerator.
yeah,
Backwards.
except that it can either heat or cool, and they are among the cheapest ways to heat your house.
Right now, they're competitive with wood.
Yeah, that's something
This
worth.
is a relatively new
It's-
development,
right.
Because 20 years ago they wouldn't work in this climate.
They wouldn't, and they were very inefficient. But now they will work down to, I think they're about 50% efficient at 15 degrees below zero.
I think
Which
I've seen
means
that same figure.
Yep, you need to have a certain amount. You need to have the ability to do a little backup power if you're going to have air source heat pumps. Ground source heat pumps, I think you don't need to have backup power. You know that it has that. I mean, not backup power. You don't need to have backup heating.
So
But
again, the technology is changing.
yeah, it's changing. Okay, we have to get moving here, Tom, because we've only got 17 minutes left. Okay, coal mining in Australia is entering what is called a structural decline, with projects set to become unviable due to unrealistic expectations over the potential to export fossil fuels to China and India, according to a new report. This is reported by The Guardian. And we have actually said that on this show, haven't we?
Yeah, I got a couple of Australians here I'll pull up.
Oh, yeah. The Prime Minister of Australia, who has been promoting fossil fuels like mad and trying to suppress renewables, is, I have read, the kind of person who likes to get into brawls in bars.
Well, this is an interesting development because they had some kind of a promotion down there.
Yeah.
saying, take your money out of the banks that invest in fossil fuels.
Right.
Apparently it succeeded far beyond anybody's dreams. I mean, they pulled, well, here it is there. Hundreds of customers moved around 4 million Australian dollars out of, and it names 4 banks.
Yeah.
In a protest organized by campaign groups Market Forces and 350.org. I've heard of them.
Yeah, their office is right, you know.
To mark Australia's first national days of divestment action.
Yeah, and the sense that I have is that there are political movements that are going to regret very much that they're backing fossil fuels by the time this thing is over, because people are going to start blaming them. But yeah, structural decline. Okay, on the 7th of May, and the 7th is yesterday, so we may actually finish this in an hour. Now we are at another critical moment in agriculture. Climate change is bringing more frequent and severe weather challenges, unlike any farmers have faced it before. And it says in the article that has this, compares the current time to the Dust Bowl. It says we're in a situation that's worse than the Dust Bowl.
I got some stuff. I don't have any pictures of it, but
yeah,
I got this exact thing.
The farmers are already feeling the effects. Ladies and gentlemen, the Central Valley of California is the place where we get our lettuce in most of the stores around here in Vermont, and they haven't got any water for irrigation this year. What are they going to do? They aren't going to plant lettuce and grow it, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, all of Southern California is in a drought, in a severe drought.
The entire state is in a drought.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy Ray Mallory, now she's the editor of Green Energy Times. Her son lives in the Sierra Nevadas, and she called me, I think it was in February, and said they had no snow on the ground. Now, in the place where her son lives, at that point of the year, they usually have somewhere between 25 and 30 feet of snow on the ground.
And they had none.
And they had none.
And this snow is what replenishes the reservoir.
Absolutely. And they have since got a certain amount of snow, but nothing like what they normally have. And, you know, this snow is what's replenishing the reservoirs. So the government is sitting there saying, well, what are we going to do with this water? Well, we can use it for industry and for people making food and washing their clothes and drinking. But what else can we do? And they came to the conclusion that really they couldn't do anything at all. There is no way that they can part with any of that water. And the worst of it is, when they get a rain, they don't get, you know, a week of half an inch a day, which is what they need.
Torrent.
They get 8 inches in one day and then it dries up. You know, this is a serious problem. And it's not a problem that's forecast to go away. It's not as bad for the West as a whole as it was last year. But last year, virtually the entire West, from the Mississippi River, a little beyond the Mississippi River, west of that, was in a state of drought, and much of it was in a state of drought that was worse than extreme. They had worse than extreme. They had they had moderately dry, very dry, extremely dry, and exceptionally dry. I don't know what the difference between extreme and exceptional is, but
doesn't sound good. Whatever
it doesn't sound good. And exceptional is worse. And they had huge areas of Texas, and Kansas, and Oklahoma, and Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado that were in extreme drought. And now that extreme drought has settled in California, where they were in drought already.
The takeaway is right here. This is from your article.
Yeah.
We don't know what normal is anymore.
Yeah.
Climate change is bringing more frequent and severe weather challenges, unlike any that farmers have seen before. And already farmers are feeling the effects. Countless scientists agree that climate change will affect every part of our food system, from crop yields to food processing and distribution.
Right.
More dry days and hot nights will stress already limited water resources. Ironically, this is just what you said. When it does rain, it will pour, exacerbating soil erosion. Farmers will need to confront new challenges from weeds, diseases, and pests.
You know, there's another interesting thing on this too, and that is the problem in California is the result of a weather pattern that has two components.
Yeah.
And the second component is the polar vortex,
That's what we got.
which we got last winter. And that's a problem because it means we're going to have a lot of rain in the summer and we're going to have very cold winters. And the reason we have very cold winters, ladies and gentlemen, it's called global warming.
But that's a myth.
Yeah, right. Well, the second thing that came up the same day, that was from the Energy Collective. This comes from CNN. Climate change is no longer a distant threat, but a real and present danger in the United States, according to a new U.S. government report, which was released by the White House. This U.S. Global Change Research Program says that climate change is already being felt across the country, and 41% of the people in the United States believe that climate change is real. 41%.
41,
Yeah.
In Europe, something like
97% of
97.
all climate-oriented scientists have said they believe it is real. About 1/100th of 1% has objected that it isn't, and we're being given a bill of goods by the petroleum interests who are interested in maintaining their $28 trillion that they will lose if we close them down. You know,
Stranded assets.
it's money.
They were smart when it was smart to be smart.
Yep.
But it's not smart anymore.
We've got two choices here. We can believe in climate change and do something about it, or we can believe the prognostications of people who will make lots of money if we believe them. And that's what it boils down to.
Well, what happens if we believe it and do something about it?
Well,
What happens if there isn't any climate change and we still do some positive things?
well, we're going to wind up reducing our electric bills because the, you know, I had
But
a,
if we're wrong, it's disaster.
yeah, right. I got into a thing on an email thing on one of the comment sections actually of one of these articles, and a fellow in the article was talking about what a shame it was that we're closing down Vermont Yankee because it's a nuclear plant that is in such good condition. Okay, and I said, why should we have a nuclear plant when we can get 1,000% of what we need from solar? Now, I had already also said, well, you know, you got to bear in mind the reason the nuclear plant is closing down is because it isn't making money. And it's not going to open up if it isn't making money. And it's given up its license at the end of this year. It's actually promised to do that, both to the federal government and to the state government. It's hard to imagine that they could keep that thing going. And, you know, a bunch of other stuff. Well, the guy came back and he said, look, if you develop 1,000% of your solar, it's going to cost you, you know, $56 billion or something, whatever it was. And the figure that he gave, aside from the fact that he was saying you can't develop 1,000% of your solar because you haven't got enough money, and I replied, we don't have to develop 1,000% of our solar. We only have to develop 100% of what we need, and we don't have to take that all out of solar. But he was saying it's $4 a watt.
It's what?
$4 a watt for solar.
Where do you get that number?
I think it was a retail figure in wherever he was. We will get into that in a moment. There was a thing in the news today about that, as a matter of fact. So let's go on to today, because it's the last item. Today, investors could spend up to $1.1 trillion over the next decade on oil projects and assets that never reach production if governments enforce measures to curb climate change. The projects require a market price of at least $95 a barrel to break even.
I read that one.
Now, what the oil interests and the coal interests are trying to get us to do is to not to develop our renewables, which they say cost too much, because they want to develop resources that cost too much. There you go. The next item, a new study of South Australia's electric sector found that wind energy greatly reduced the state's carbon emissions without increasing wholesale electricity prices. without increasing wholesale electric prices, or requiring backup. They don't need any backup for this. In South Australia,
The wind blows all the time.
well, the wind accounts for 28% of the electricity produced already. That is from ecobusiness.com. And finally, the one that I wanted to get back to on this business of costs. A Sky Power Global and FAS Energy joint venture signed a deal to build 3 gigawatts of solar projects in Nigeria at an estimated cost of $5 billion. Sky Power FAS Energy expects to build the projects in phases over 5 years, with initial commercial operation beginning in 2015. Now, I want to point out, here is this guy saying $4 a watt, and here is a commercial operation this year, signed a contract to build 3 gigawatts at $5 billion, which is $1.67 a watt.
And Nigeria has oil.
Nigeria has oil, but oil's a problem. Oil, for one thing, they have to protect that oil. Every once in a while, somebody blows up the pipeline.
Yeah, that's a big problem in Nigeria.
They've got a lot of problems with oil in Nigeria. But here is what the future is. We're talking about right now. They're signing contracts at $1.67 a watt. And I admit they're getting labor that would be below minimum wage in the United States because they're getting it in Nigeria.
Yep.
But the fact is, these things are going up inexpensively, and the prices are going down. And now we have run out of news. So what else have we got to talk about, Tom?
Well, I got a bunch of things that I've been saving here. Let's take a look at this one here. I thought that I brought it up before, but I don't think I did. This is in Western England.
Western England. Okay.
Swansea Bay.
Oh, yes, it's not in England. That's not England.
Oh, it is.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it is.
No, Swansea is
Swansea
Wales.
Bay. Swansea is in Wales.
Aha, you're
Look
right.
at the
I'm wrong.
map.
Yeah, I'm wrong. You're right.
That's Swansea Bay, and this project is happening in Bristol.
In Bristol. I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this is the first time I've been called wrong successfully this morning. And when I'm home in the afternoon, I am told I'm wrong very often.
I look at the map, and I don't have to
correctly.
wonder why they call this New England. Gloucester, Bristol, Newport,
Yes, I know.
Winchester, Southampton, Portsmouth, St. Albans.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all
But
there.
here's what they're doing, and this is pretty neat.
It is.
What we're looking at on the left is the existing harbor and beach.
Right.
Okay, and you probably can't see it on a map. You might be able to. There's a wall there showing there.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing on the left.
Okay.
So beyond that, out there in the sea, I'm working with the wrong mouse, ain't I?
Well, just talk, Tom. I think we can hear what you're saying.
They're planning to build a seawall
Yep.
out at sea.
Right.
It's going to impound the tide when it rises.
Right.
And the article says it's got the second highest tide in the world. I think the highest
highest
is the
in
Bay of Fundy,
Bay
right
of
up
Fundy.
here
It is.
off the coast
Yep.
of Maine.
That's right. Yeah.
So they're going to build that wall,
Yep.
and it's going to fill up during the day, or fill up when the tide
is
coming
high.
in.
Yeah.
And then when the tide is going out, they're going to generate electricity.
Well, they're going to generate electricity when it's going in either direction, I think.
Actually, I think that's true. Yeah, I think they can.
So it's only when the tide is changing that they can't generate electricity.
Yeah, which is not very much. Twice a day for about an hour.
Yeah. So this is intermittent power, but it's intermittent power that is extremely predictable.
And it looks like there's a big beach there now. It doesn't look like the beach is going to be harmed.
Yep. And one of those times that they have a stall in this, I want to point out, is going to happen during the daytime when they can get solar power.
Yeah.
And the other is going to happen at night when they probably don't need the power. So this is a pretty good deal here.
Oh yeah, they've got their head on straight on this one, I think.
It's amazing to me that anybody.
but,
yeah. Well, it's
Here it says it can power 500,000 homes.
500,000 homes.
They call it a tidal lagoon.
Lagoon. That doesn't sound like an English word, does it?
It's not. Spanish laguna is lake.
Aha, there you go. Okay.
Well, let's see what else we going to show.
Well, you just
We
pick,
saw the,
pick something.
here, this is
Oh,
an
wait a
interesting
minute,
one.
wait a minute. We've got to say goodbye to people. The show is coming
Yeah,
to an
it's,
end.
well, we got 1 minute and 33 seconds.
Well, we started a little early. Okay, for those people who are just who are watching on Cablecast, we will say goodbye. And
Goodbye.
goodbye. And for those people who are watching us on a webcast, we will say hello.
Well, I did save this other one because I thought it was pretty good. As you know, I'm fond of machines.
Yes.
Fond of things. So this is a New Age water wheel. Yeah, I
Now,
should
Tom,
bring it-
you're an
it might help
electrical.
If I brought it up on the.
You're an electrical engineer. Aren't
Yeah.
you? Yeah, but you're fond of machines.
Well, any kind of machines,
Yeah.
electrical, mechanical. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
I am too.
these are machines.
Yeah, I'm
basically.
fond of machines, and I'm
This is a pilot
computer
project.
software engineer. Go ahead.
The company's Canadian, but I think this is in the U.S. West where they're doing it.
Yep.
What you see there is a irrigation canal.
Right.
And you can look at the picture of the water, and that water's moving pretty fast in that irrigation canal.
I didn't realize that, but yeah, that makes sense.
And they put this thing across the canal, and by the way, it can swing out of the way if they have to run things up and down that canal.
Really?
And it's got this egg beater thing in the water. This one shows only one of them. And I didn't save the film, but there's a video showing this thing, and on the left it shows a typical water channel canal, irrigation canal, with these things about every football field, the entire length of it, and there's 4 of these windmills, not windmills, egg beaters,
Yeah.
in each one of these things. And they're sitting there as this water is flowing, and they're just generating energy. I mean, it's a concept now. This what the picture there is the pilot program. But if it's successful, there's a lot of these irrigation canals in the southwest of the United States.
Right.
A lot of them.
Which unfortunately right now are not being used to
Doesn't have
move
much
water. But, we'll see how that all works out in the future, I guess. So I will tell you, we are growing
They're
lettuce.
like windmills in water producing renewable energy, electricity by harvesting the kinetic energy of moving water without the need for dams, diversions, or reservoirs.
And that could be done anywhere water is moving quickly.
The article said they're working on something for use in rivers. Now, this particular concept requires a canal because they need a superstructure to hold those things. But that's not an engineering project that'd be difficult to
Well,
solve.
I'm just, as I think about this, maybe you could drop something into a river below a dam. I mean, below a bridge.
Yeah, I
Drop
guess you
something
could.
down
Yeah,
from a bridge.
There's probably a lot of ways. I mean, they could be anchored to the bottom.
Yeah. There are a lot of, I've seen turbines of different kinds that have gone into just ordinary moving water. We see those things that they're putting out into the ocean. There was one that was going in Maine.
And here's another one. Those people we all love to hate.
Walmart. I knew right off the bat when you said that who you were going to be talking about.
And they're going solar big time.
They are indeed. Whoa.
And this is just a picture of one of their roofs that they've done it to already. I
They've
wouldn't
done
be
it to a
surprised in
lot.
10 years that they don't have a solar panel on top of every roof.
Well, I'm expecting that between now and 2020, we're going to have legislation in Vermont that will pass that will require every new building of several different kinds to be capable of being
So
powered.
that could very well happen. But these guys are doing it not because of legislation. They're doing
Yeah, I
it
know.
because it saves them money.
It saves them money. Well,
a penny saved is a penny earned.
yep, but a penny spent locally is a penny in the local economy.
Well, that's another point.
You know.
And that's a valuable point.
You did a very nice job of putting that thing up on Brattleboro, by the way.
Yeah.
I thought that was really good.
Here's another one. I love this one. Let me get this one up. This is wind energy. I mean, wave energy.
Wave energy,
Yeah,
yes.
somebody invented that thing. Looks like a sea serpent.
Yep.
The only thing's missing is eyes on the front of that thing.
Well, we should
Paint a
write them
couple
and say,
eyes on there.
put eyes on those.
I can see how that thing, it writhes like a snake or an eel. It's in the water. It's got to be an eel.
There are
And it's
snakes that
generating
live in the
electricity.
water.
Huh?
There are snakes that
Oh, yeah.
live in the water.
Yeah.
Wasserschlange.
I'll take your word for it. Wasserschlange.
Die Wasserschlange.
Sounds like something.
It's German.
Yeah.
Yeah, the water snake.
Yeah, but those Wasserschlanges with striking measurements.
I'm not going to go after that joke. I know that joke. We're not going to tell that joke here. Okay.
Okay, let's see.
You know, there's a bunch of
there's
different ways that those things can make power. You know, you hear that one, you were talking about something that was going like this. Look, I'm looking like a dancer here.
Yeah.
But you know, you've got the guys that go like this,
Yeah,
and, you
the
know,
other ones go
and then
up
you
and
got up and down.
Absolutely.
It's a pretty complicated thing, but you know, you can get power out of that. You can get power because the thing that's going up and down is anchored to the bottom, and you've got something that goes in and out. And
here's another approach.
we've got more ways to make power than you can
the
shake a
one
stick.
on the left.
Oh, the one on the left. I know that one.
It's like a cooling tower in reverse.
Yep.
And they drop water down from the top,
Spray it in.
spray it in.
Yep.
It falls, creates wind, if you will.
Yep.
And at the bottom of that, you really can't see it. Well, that's an artist's conception anyhow.
Yep. Yeah, the
But
artist
all
made a
around that
mistake.
circle is a whole bunch of little turbines.
Yep. The artist made a mistake in this.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, and I'll tell you what it is. He didn't make a mistake about the way that thing looks. Those turbines, by the way, the air going through them is going at about 50 miles an hour constantly.
Yeah.
And so this is a wind turbine thing that is a 24/7
Yep.
thing. Although it'll work better
Artificial wind.
Artificial wind. It'll work much better in the daytime when it's hot out. But you know what happens at the bottom of that thing? They're putting water in at the top. It's cooling the air and driving turbines at the bottom, and it's going to be coming out in all directions.
You got a water disposal
Much cooler,
problem, don't you?
much cooler, and laden with water.
Yeah.
And so you've got a water disposal problem. So you could plant a little farm around that thing. They should have put that in there. They should have
Boy,
put the
you
little
could.
garden around that thing where they're growing the lettuce that they're not able to grow in Central California anymore. Now think about that.
It's blowing my mind already.
Absolutely. You know, we've got, you know, I keep telling people, we've got more ways to get power than you can shake a stick at. There's no reason for us to be spending money digging stuff out of the ground.
And by the way, that's not a little thing. That's going to be big.
I know, it's going to be
They're talking about it. It could be the North America's tallest structure.
Right. It comes out.
It's gonna be big.
Yeah, tallest structure. And when they're talking about tallest structure, they're comparing that thing with radio masts. They're not comparing it with skyscrapers. This thing is going to be something like it'll be something.
2,250 feet.
So we're talking about over 200 stories. This is twice the height. It's almost twice the height of the World Trade Center.
The downdraft creates 50-mile-an-hour winds, just like you said.
I'm smart.
And forced into tunnels at the base of the tower.
Yeah.
Our tower makes roughly about half the power of a traditional nuclear power plant, and the price of that carbon-free power would be cheaper than coal-fired electricity.
Yeah.
He claimed.
Yeah, well, I think he's probably right. If he's got the water, that's the critical problem. They have to have the water.
Got to have the water. It doesn't look like in that picture there's a lot of water.
No, but you know, I was just thinking, I wonder if this thing needs more water than a coal-fired power plant, because it might not.
It might not.
That's funny.
And of course they can use the water over.
Yes, if they can recover it, they can use it over.
Pump it right back up to the
Yeah,
top.
that's right.
On the same article is the picture we see on the right, and they call it a quixotic scheme. Build a giant tower in the middle of nowhere to produce renewable energy. This one is a 1,600-foot power in the Australian outback that creates an updraft rather than a downdraft. So what you're seeing there in the bottom is a whole bunch of reflectors, a bunch of mirrors.
And all they're doing is heating that thing
They're
up.
heating that air.
So they don't need any water.
Right. Acting as a giant greenhouse, the solar collector will superheat radiation from the sun. Hot air rises naturally, and a tower will operate as a giant vacuum. As the air is sucked into the tower, it will produce wind to power an array of turbine generators
And
clustered
I
around the
wonder if
structure.
that strongly up-moving wind is going to create a little tornado coming out of the top. You know, things like that can happen.
This was actually done in a pilot plant in Spain
Really?
quite a while ago.
Okay.
Quite a while ago, and it was a little one. It was about 200 feet, 300 feet, and it was, well, a pilot project.
Yeah.
And they left it running, and it got knocked over in a tornado about 3 or 4 years later.
The tornado it created, no doubt.
Well, they didn't say that, but
Yeah.
that's a possibility.
Yeah.
That's a possibility.
My Uncle Charlie, who was one of the more interesting people I've ever met,
I think I heard about him. He sounds like he was.
Uncle Charlie told me that there was somebody who built something, a concept kind of like that. It was a couple 100-foot tall tower in Nebraska during the Depression. And they got a lot of local money invested in the thing, and they were going to produce power from the updraft. But the problem they had was they weren't heating the thing with those mirrors. They were just expecting there to be an updraft, and it wasn't powerful enough to turn their turbine.
Okay.
So they had this thing that was out in the middle of a field in Nebraska in the 1930s, but unfortunately, it didn't work. What do you got here?
Well, this is a little closer to home in a way. This is a real project. It exists, and it's a brownfield over a landfill
Right,
in Michigan.
in Michigan, yes.
And it was developed as Michigan's first brownfield location to generate renewable energy.
Yeah,
Closed and capped 20 years ago and unused since then, the landfill is now the site of a 535.5 kW. That's not terribly big.
no,
Solar system with 2,100 PV panels.
yep,
And why I think, the reason I think it's pertinent here is we just got the approval from the state to build up to 5 megs
right,
at our landfill.
right. That's the
And
Wyndham, that's
Wyndham
the
Solid Waste,
Solid Waste District's landfill in Brattleboro.
which they're using already to produce.
There's a certain
gas
amount of
power.
solar, well, there's solar going in there anyway. I don't know.
I
if
think
it's-
there's a little solar. Yeah, there is. There's a small one,
Yeah,
and they've been tapping the gas from the landfill
right.
for at least 20 years, and that's almost exhausted.
Yeah, Brattleboro. What was it that I read? Brattleboro was the first had the first landfill that was being tapped for gas. Is that correct?
You may have read it right here.
Yeah.
It was last week, I think.
I think it
I had
was.
a picture of. If I didn't, I have a picture of it. Of, we're running out of this one. Let's see if I can pull another one up. I can probably pull that one up. You go on talking while
I go on
searching.
talking.
Well, I go searching.
We've got the landfills. You know, the state of Massachusetts is pursuing landfills. They're trying to get basically every landfill in the state covered with solar panels. There's not a lot you can do with a landfill. You can't grow crops on it because it's
brownfield.
It's brownfield. It's poisoned basically.
Yeah, I got some goodies on this one.
You can't build on it because it's unstable. There's not a lot you can do with a landfill, but it's perfect for these solar panels. The first one I saw like that was the one in Greenfield, Massachusetts. They have I think it's a 2 megawatt system or 3 megawatt system, something like that they put in, and that system is supplying a certain amount of power to the town. Not all of the power it supplies goes to the town, but they're supplying power to the town at a cost of 1 cent per kilowatt hour.
I bet you that the SEA had something to do with that.
Might be.
Northeast Solar Energy Association. They're located in Greenfield.
Nessie.
Nessie.
Yeah, they're located in Greenfield, that's right.
Yeah.
They have a wonderful conference every year, and it's, I think, always in Boston.
Uh-huh.
And
This
really
picture that's
good-
up there,
good deal.
that is Brattleboro. That's very
That's Brattleboro.
and that's the last 2 remaining generators.
At
The story on that is interesting. Several of them burned up.
yeah,
I have no idea why or how, but they burned
Yeah.
up.
yep.
That's something.
And the largest of them is still operating.
Well, these 2 are still operating now.
Okay.
I
And-
think the largest one's been closed.
Oh, really? Well, what they're doing here is people used to throw, and this is something that has to be brought to a stop, But people used to throw a lot of food waste into landfills. And that and other things that could decompose, as they decompose in anaerobic situations, produce methane gas.
Exactly.
Which is the gas people call swamp gas. And that gas, if it comes off into the atmosphere, which eventually it will if it's allowed to do what it will,
is
a worse gas by at least 20 times, and I've read as much as 35 or 40 times as bad as carbon dioxide. And there are other problems with this gas too. I think it was Rikers Island, where there's a prison for New York. That island used to be a dump. And one of the problems with the dump, if you went onto it, you were really kind of risking your life because
it was bad air.
It would occasionally explode.
Oh.
All right.
Okay.
And I mean, this was just something that was going on an ongoing basis. Yeah. The gas would build up underground, and then all it's got to do is hit some smoldering thing.
And there's walking around with a cigarette.
Yep. And or there were always fires going on. Uh-huh. There was a constant fire. And there was a constant buildup of methane. So every once in a while, I don't know how often it was, but often enough that it was dangerous to be there, the island exploded. And then they stopped using it as a dump, and they started, I don't know what they did instead. Knowing the people of that period, they probably just put things on barges and towed them out to sea.
They were doing that for many
years. When I was in the chemical industry in New Jersey, many years ago, about 35 years ago. Am I really 35? No, it was 45 years ago. My goodness, where has time gone? The chemical industries in New Jersey would have scrap chemicals, and they would put them on trucks and ship them to Kearney, where they were loaded on barges and taken out to sea. And two of the guys that I knew who drove those trucks died one day because one chemical plant sent down waste that included acid, it was scrap acid. Another place sent down stuff from a waste treatment plant. Then it was municipal waste. The two of them mixed. They made hydrogen sulfide, and the hydrogen sulfide is as deadly as carbon monoxide. Mm-hmm. And the first thing it does, it's the stuff that smells like rotten eggs. Mm-hmm. First thing it does when it gets you is it destroys your sense of smell.
So you can't smell it
temporarily. But they couldn't smell anything. They didn't know that anything was wrong. One of the guys fell down. The other knew that he had a heart condition, thought that he was having a heart attack, went to his aid. I think he was attempting to do CPR or something like that. He was a Boy Scout leader, and he got it too.
Wow.
And it was because of this neglectful use of waste. And what did they do with that waste? They took it out into the area off Long Island and New Jersey, and just opened the bottom of the barge and let it all fall out.
I used to see those barges going out to sea.
Yeah, and the assumption was that the ocean was big enough that you could throw anything into it, and it didn't matter. And of course, when our ancestors were cavemen, that was true. Yeah. You could throw anything in the ocean and something would come along.
It was probably even true then, sort of.
Sort of, yeah.
But it just got bigger and bigger.
It got bigger and bigger, and when you've got 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 billion people on the planet, you can't do that anymore.
No.
And so we've got a situation now where people are starting to look at the waste and they're starting to say, what are we going to do with this? And lo and behold, it turns out you can make money with it.
Well, that's the bottom line. And I've said this before, there is no waste in nature. There's something that eats everything.
Yes.
There's something that eats that something. There is no waste in nature.
Yeah.
It doesn't go away. I mean, it goes away. It becomes part of the cycle.
Yes.
And we have to emulate that.
Yes.
And we're starting to get smart to that, and we're starting to figure out how to do it.
Yes.
We're nowhere near even beginning that now. We should not. The word waste should disappear from our language.
That's an interesting idea. That really is a good thought. waste should disappear from our
Yeah,
language.
it's not waste. It's feedstock.
It's
for
feedstock
something.
for something, and that includes carbon dioxide. We were talking about that
Yeah,
earlier.
yeah.
Carbon dioxide can be used for making plastics. There was an article a couple of weeks ago where they were taking carbon dioxide and hydrogen. Okay, the hydrogen is being made by breaking down water into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen byproduct is just released into the atmosphere. It's not going to hurt anything. The hydrogen that they've got, which they've arrived at by using renewable power, is then, by renewable power, catalyzed with the carbon dioxide which was trapped from the plant. And what do they get out of that? They get kerosene.
Make it anything you can make out of oil.
Right. And what they're using the kerosene for is fueling aircraft.
Mm-hmm. Jet engines.
Jet engines. This is a big operation. This is a big operation. We're talking about billions of dollars
The
here.
Navy is working heavily on exactly this.
Exactly that, yeah. And you know, you capture that carbon dioxide. What they're doing now is they're trying to figure out where to put it so that they can store it. But in the end, it's not going to be where do we store this. We're going to say, okay, we've got to prioritize how we're going to use this. And under those circumstances, plastics, great way to sequester carbon dioxide.
Plastics.
Is in plastics,
Yeah.
because if you've made them so that they're not recyclable and you try to make them into something that's permanent, you can make them into something that is just sequestering the carbon dioxide. If they are recyclable and you're using them over again, it's still sequestering the carbon dioxide. It's just that you've got a
They're just in a different form.
in a different form.
Yeah. Here's an interesting gimmick.
Oh, I want to get one of these.
A portable wind turbine power station
That's right.
that will repower your cell phone.
Yep.
Now they're not going to sell very many of them at $300.
No, I don't think so. These
But it's
things
still
were
pretty clever.
These things were what is it? 15 amps at 12 volts or something.
15 watts.
15 watts.
15 watt generator with a built-in battery that holds 15,000 milliampere hours. That's 15 ampere hours for the year.
Yeah. Right.
15,000
Milliampere hours. Well, we're talking about taking this on vacation so that you can be out in the middle of nowhere and keep your cell phone powered, and it'll do that. But
Yep.
you know, one of the things that's interesting about this, there are 4 different wind turbine designs that I have seen, and one of them is the horizontal axis wind turbine that you see all over the wind farms, the pinwheel. The second is a vertical axis like this, and this kind of turbine was actually, I think, the first one invented. It was invented in China. The Europeans invented the horizontal axis. The Chinese invented the vertical axis, which is this.
What, 5,000 years ago? Or
Something like that.
Yeah.
It's a long time ago. And then there was that turbine that we saw earlier where you've got a downdraft produced by falling cold air.
Yeah.
And then you could do the same with the updraft, as you pointed
There's
out.
the other
And
side
then
of
there's
that coin
the other
too.
one, which is kind of like the pinwheel that's tethered and put up in the air. But this guy there's something that's really unique about this guy, because it doesn't care what direction the wind is coming
Exactly.
from. So the wind can be very turbulent, and it will get
still gonna
power
turn
out of that
Yep,
turbulence.
yep.
So these things can be mounted on people's roofs, and they can be mounted on buildings in towns where the wind blows from all kinds of different directions and changes
There's a
a lot.
local guy, I don't remember his name, but he's working on or trying to market exactly that. Small
Really?
little vertical axis wind turbines that you'll put around the eaves of your home.
Yep,
We'll put 4 or 5 of them around your house.
yep.
I don't know the numbers, but the concept's
Concept works.
great.
Yep. And they have these things too. Some of the ones that are more recent have a kind of a helical shape
Yeah,
to
some
the
of them
blades.
do.
And I don't know what the relative efficiencies of these things are, but
I'll show this picture just because I like it.
oh no!
Sour subsidies do not a happy taxpayer make.
Yeah, why are we supporting the coal industry and the oil industry when they're costing us so much money?
Because they have money that they use to generate funds for politicians.
For politicians, in other words, because the system doesn't work.
We used to call such things bribes. We don't anymore.
We don't call them bribes. No, because they're not actually giving them to the politicians. They're giving them to the politicians' campaigns. Or they're giving them to political action committees,
And
PACs.
here's the Navy. We talked about that already.
Yes.
The Navy's increasing use of alternative fuels and electricity sources.
Well, it's not just the Navy. It's all of the everything in the Department of Defense.
Oh yeah, but I like the picture of the ship.
Yeah. Well, one of the things they've been doing is they've been putting up solar and I think possibly portable wind in various places because it reduces the number of convoys that are needed. And so this means that you can protect the convoys better.
They don't have to move the stuff so much. It's
Yeah.
logistics.
And it saves lives, not having to do that.
Now, here's
Here
heat
we
pumps.
have, this is the ground source heat pump, and this is what we were talking about earlier in geothermal. This is the kind of geothermal that supplies power to a house. And they're expensive. The geothermal is more expensive than the air source.
Yes, yes.
But it's also more efficient. So,
Yes.
it is an alternative. It will take heat out of the ground. When you go about 5 feet down, there was a geologist who mentioned this to me years and years ago. He said, there's a way to know what the average temperature of a place is that's really easy. And you can just find out like that any time of the year.
Just go down 5 feet.
You go down 5 feet.
Makes sense.
Find out what the temperature is down there. One of the things about solar power is that solar power is absorbed by the ground in the summertime, and it's stored underground.
Yeah.
So about 5 feet
Exactly
down,
right.
if your average temperature during the course of the year is 55 degrees, then 5 feet underground, it's going to be 55 degrees. So if you go more than 5 feet down, you're in an area where it's always going to be 55 or warmer, because there's also air coming up from underground. It radiates upward, I guess it's convected upward from underground, and a lot of this depends upon water movement and things like that underground. But that heat that is underground is not going to be dissipated or drawn off by a ground source heat pump. And so you have a thing like that where you're pumping water down, you're bringing it up, and then what happens is you've got a thing that's like an air conditioner or a refrigerator, mechanical system. And what's happening, should we explain how that works to people? Do you think people want to know how that works? Maybe they do.
Go for it.
Okay. When you compress air, when you compress it, it gets
hot.
It really gets excited, and it's hot.
Yeah, if you ever used a pump to heat up a football, you know it gets hot.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so what happens is, if you get it hot, and then you let it cool off while it's compressed,
okay,
you take the pressure off, and what does it do? It gets cold again. Only this time it's going to be colder than it was when you started compressing it. And that's how an air conditioner or refrigerator works. You compress the air, and then there's coils under or behind the refrigerator that
dissipate the
heat up, and they dissipate that heat. So a refrigerator actually warms your kitchen while it's cooling the food. And there are people I've known who have put their refrigerators on the back porch or something like that. In fact, I knew one person who had a door in the kitchen that went to an unheated porch, so that the refrigerator would be putting its heat into the outdoors. Most of the year it's colder, and so it costs less to run the refrigerator. The air conditioner does exactly the same thing, except that it's putting the cold air into the house, the hot air out of the house. The coils are hot. The places where the gas is cooled off because the pressure is reduced, are cold. You can see that same pressure reduction, what happens when you use a carbon dioxide fire extinguisher. You turn it on and this white stuff comes out. What's the white stuff? It's frozen carbon dioxide. It's about 100 degrees or whatever that is.
They call that dry ice.
Dry ice. It's very cold. You do not want to get that on your skin because it'll really burn you badly. But what happens with the air source heat pump is that it's like an air conditioner, except that you have a choice of which direction the cold goes in and which direction the heat goes in. Now, these things are sufficiently efficient that you can get pretty good heating out of them when the place where you're drawing the heat from is at 0 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay.
All right, you can actually get heat out of this when it's 15 below out.
Yeah, yeah.
It's much less efficient at that temperature, but you can get it.
But
and of
there
course,
is definitely heat at 15 below.
yeah, there's heat in outer space where it's 3 degrees Kelvin. But the ground source heat pump, you're pulling that heat instead of going to the outside where it might be 0 or 15 below or 23 above or whatever. You're going to the ground, which in the first place conducts heat much more efficiently than air does. And in the second place is always 55 degrees. So it's like living in a place where it's 55 degrees in terms of where you're disposing of your cold. And
So a ground source heat pump, it doesn't have to be hot down there.
no,
But if it is hot,
if it's hot.
as we see in this picture here, you
Yeah.
could drill a well.
Now you were talking about a place with a hot spring. And in that particular place, you didn't need the heat pump. You could just heat the hot water.
I think they were just running the hot water through radiators, because
Right.
this was built in the 30s.
Yep. And
Probably
they had.
some smart local guy saw it and did it for his own house and
Yeah.
said, you know, I can make some money.
Yep.
And he ran around to his neighbors and said, let me heat your house.
Yep. There are other things that you can do with a little bit of heat. And one of them is the Stirling engine. You know about Stirling
Yeah,
engines.
it's an external combustion engine.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. And you can buy versions of the Stirling engine that are very small. They're for like
First high school science lab.
yes.
Yeah.
And they are so sensitive in some cases that you just hold the thing in your hand.
It runs.
And it'll run from the heat of your hand, the difference in the temperature between your hand and the air.
Wow.
So the colder the air is, the faster it's going to go. But interestingly enough with these things is that it doesn't really matter whether you're heating it or cooling it. It's still going to run as long as there's a difference.
As long as it's temperature.
So, you know, if you had a swimming pool, you could put one of these things on your swimming pool and it would draw heat out of the air and put it into the swimming pool and make power in the process, you know. There are a lot of things that you can do with heat, and that Stirling engine is definitely one of them. They're big though, and they cost a lot of money for the amount of energy that they will produce.
Well, if we started mass producing them, the price would come way down, I'm sure.
There was a company that was talking about using Stirling engines to power automobiles. And of course that meant that they were, the difference in the heat was that they were going to apply fuel to it and have I don't know what the combustion fuel was. It might have been kerosene or it might have been fuel oil, but they were going to apply.
They heat them artificially.
Right, and they weren't heating water, they were just heating air. So these things are really interesting.
Here's another one I think you're going to like.
What's that?
The flow battery.
The flow battery. Oh, the flow battery is beautiful. Do you want to explain that, or you're the electrical engineer?
Well, I'll read it. The zinc bromine, can't even say it.
Zinc bromine
flow battery.
Yes.
Is a type of hybrid flow battery. A solution of zinc bromide is stored in 2 tanks. When a battery is charged or discharged, the solutions, which are called electrolytes, are pumped through a reactor stack, whatever that is, and back into the tanks. One tank is used to store the electrolyte for the positive electrode reactions, the other for the negative. Zinc bromide batteries from different manufacturers have energy densities ranging from 35 to 55 watt hours per kilogram.
Okay.
I don't think that's really relevant, but in any case.
Well, it tells you, if you want to sit down and do the calculations, you can find out how big a battery
how big it's going to be.
It would be. For example, if we said we want to do solar power in Brattleboro and we need to be able to store a megawatt hour.
Okay.
You'd be able to do the calculation and find out how much it's going to weigh. And a megawatt hour is not going to be enough for Brattleboro, but it would be enough to help.
But a whole bunch of them would be.
A whole bunch of them would be. And there's some really wonderful advantages to this kind of battery.
And here's how they explain it a little bit better. The zinc bromine battery can be regarded as an electroplating machine.
There you go.
I didn't think about that. During the charging, zinc is electroplated onto conductive electrodes, while at the same time bromine is formed. On discharge, the reverse process occurs. The metallic zinc plated on the negative electrodes dissolves in the electrolyte and is available to be plated again at the next charge cycle. And it says it can be left discharged indefinitely without damage. So this hasn't actually said that, but what it says and where it would be important in power storage is there's a virtually infinite number of cycles.
Yes.
It doesn't
Yes.
deteriorate when it's discharged.
And that deterioration is
discharge it. So here's just another example of people thinking outside of the box.
Right. Well, the flow batteries, some of the flow batteries, the discharge, what they do is they have 4, as I understand it, and I might be wrong here, they have 4 tanks. And the liquids are pumped from 2 of those tanks by each other with a membrane in between, and nothing is plated, but the liquid comes out and is put in the other tank as there is a discharge of ions through that membrane. And when you get to a certain point where you need to recharge the battery, you don't have to recharge it. You can simply dump the 2 tanks where it's built up and put in new stuff. So you could actually use that kind of thing to power.
So you can store the liquid somewhere.
Right. You can use that to power a car.
Okay.
If the car had service stations like gas stations where you could pick up the electrolytes, you could empty one tank and pump into the others, one group of tanks and pump into the others at the same time. So it would be like filling a car with gasoline. And you could just change those. Now these things can be recovered, as you said, and they can be restored so that they can be used over.
Exactly.
Now I will tell you, I've worked with zinc and I've worked with bromine, and bromine is not 100% easy.
I can believe that.
I used to work
with chlorine, but worse.
Well, no, it's like chlorine, but better actually.
Better.
Yeah, I've worked with chlorine, and you don't want to breathe chlorine gas.
No,
it's really nasty stuff.
It changes the expression on your face.
It does, and it may change it permanently too. But I've worked with bromine. I've never worked with fluorine, and I'm glad for that. But chlorine is nasty. They used to use it as a military gas agent, and then bromine is a liquid, kind of a brownish liquid, and it's pretty reactive. And then the next one down in the series is iodine. I did a lot of work with iodine, and that stuff, even iodine, which is relatively benign compared to the other two,
still reacts.
Well, I'll tell you, I saw a 5/8 inch 316 stainless steel shaft that was used to drive a propeller to do agitation in a 150 watt vat. The amount of material that was put in was wrong, and so where the person was supposed to be coming up with a neutral solution, he came up with a highly acidic solution, and the acid was hydriatic acid, and that shaft dissolved in 10 minutes. Okay.
By the way, I have to mention, this iodine is not the same stuff you put on a cut.
Well, actually, it is. It's not in the same concentration.
Yeah, that's a tincture. That's
a tincture. That's right.
Iodine is dissolved in alcohol.
That's right, and
which is why it stings.
It stings like
stings.
Oh, no, the iodine stings
too.
Yes.
Well, I have no experience with.
But iodine, if you get iodine on your, one of the things that every once in a while would happen was people in the plant would always wear rubber boots
Yeah.
and they'd be lazy about closing the boots up.
Yeah.
And so the boot would be open at the top, and something drops in there, and you'd have a little chunk of iodine fall in there, and it would start to hurt after a while, and then you'd have this purple spot on your foot. It was not going to go away unless you bathed it in the photographer's hypo solution would take care of that. But the bromine, the point is the bromine is reactive, so you're going to have you're going to but to tell you the truth, I'd rather store bromine than gasoline. The gasoline is awful stuff.
Oh, gasoline is.
It's bad news.
We're used to it, but
yeah, we're used to it.
It's not nice stuff at all.
Not nice. Not nice at all. Not nice. Leave your gasoline in your gas tank of your lawnmower over the winter, and you'll find out about gasoline.
This is an interesting one. It's not spectacular, but it's interesting. This is a state in India called Tamil Nadu.
Yep.
And in this local municipality, they have implemented solar panels on each of their schools.
Good for them.
And the little control unit that's probably in the principal's office there on the right. And they did it themselves. I mean, the rooftop installations were executed in just 10 days by the local EPC, whatever that is, Environmental Protection Commission or something
I don't
like
know.
that. The projects include 250-watt polycrystalline solar panels from Vicram. I don't know Vicram. 12 panels in each school. The systems will produce enough energy during school hours to run fans and lights. They will also help operate motors to store water in overhead tanks for drinking and toilet use. If any excess power is generated, this additional power is sent back to the grid, and schools benefit through the net metering. This is in India.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot going on in India with renewable power because they need the power.
I've known a lot of pretty bright Indian guys.
Yes, I have too.
I don't know if it's their culture or if it's their genetics, but there's a lot of bright Indians floating around.
There are a lot of them. Yeah. I've worked with a couple of very nice fellows who actually one of them came from Madras, which is he spoke Tamil, which is the language that they speak in that part of the world.
And here's something we talked about already.
What is that?
Conservative heavyweights have solar industry in their sights.
Yeah, well.
And those two guys hiding behind the words are the Koch brothers.
Two of them.
Two of them.
The third one is one of the ones who is behind the attacks on the.
He's the stealth Koch brother.
He's the stealth Koch brother. He was the one who was attacking Cape Wind.
And their father made all his money in the Soviet Union.
Yes,
The founder of the John Birch Society.
Yeah, he hated what was going on there. It's kind of like the flip side of Arm & Hammer.
Yeah. Who has nothing to do with the baking soda.
I thought
He bought it because of the name, but that was a coincidence.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Now, he was a very wealthy guy, and he apparently bailed Lenin out. Red capitalist. He apparently bailed Lenin out. He was a doctor, and I remember seeing him on television, and he said that he went to the Soviet Union while Lenin was the head of it, and he said in the town that he was in, he heard children crying in the night, and he went to Lenin and he said, "Why are children crying in the night?" And Lenin said, "Because we need money for food, and we don't have it." And Arm & Hammer said, "Well, why can't you get money?" And Lenin said, "We have no credit. No one will loan us money." And so Arm & Hammer said, "Well, how much do you need?" And Lenin said, "We need $1.5 million.
Which was a lot of money.
A lot of money in those days. And Arm & Hammer said, "Well, I've got $1.5 million. I'll loan it to you."
Yeah.
So he did, and that saved a lot of children from having to cry in the night. I don't know, I can't say much about what he did after that.
I don't know much. I just know he was called the Red Capitalist.
Yeah, and also that story, by the way, was a story that I'm telling the way he told it.
Yeah.
So it might be promotional self-interest in that.
Well, here's a quickie here. We've talked about that already. Just have
Look at that. That is the smell of progress going up into the air.
Read this report and you can't deny the reality. Unless we act dramatically and quickly, science tells us our climate and our way of life are literally in jeopardy.
Yes.
Denial of the science is malpractice.
And you know what's going to happen? We've got people in one of our political parties who I think are trying to deny that for reasons that have to do with campaign finances.
Oh, absolutely.
And
by the way, that quote was John Kerry.
Yeah.
The quote I just made,
Yeah.
it came from John Kerry.
What's going to happen for that political party, I think, is that at some point people are going to have to stop denying this. And when they do, all of the causes of that party will be lost because the party will be lost.
Their credibility is going to go
Their
right
credibility is, and it's going out the window as we speak. So it would probably behoove them. Now,
Say Benghazi 3 times quickly.
Yeah, right. They're not 100% like that. It's not local parties either. I mean, one of the things. What is the senator's name? Grassley.
There is a Grassley.
Grassley, yeah, from Iowa.
I don't know much about him, but I think
he's
you're
a
right,
Republican.
from Iowa, yeah.
And he was very upset because of attacks on renewable energy projects. And the same thing is true of other. You know, it's interesting to me. You see the Republicans, the conservatives have got a big grip on the Midwest, Oklahoma, Kansas,
And the
Nebraska, and the South. But the Midwest, and the Midwest is a place where the wind blows. And the powers that are trying to attack renewables are trying to deal with the fact that they are centered in the Midwest where the wind blows.
And everybody knows the wind blows.
And yeah, and on top of everything else, now they've got this problem with Oklahoma where people are starting to experience earthquakes.
Yeah.
And where people are starting to experience health problems. That person who got a $3 million judgment because of fracking destroying their health of their family was living in Texas. And you know, I think basically what that means is those attacks are coming home in exactly the places where the conservative Republicans are strong. And that's going to have an effect. And it's going to have an effect of discrediting the Republican Party, I'm afraid. And that discreditation is going to be extended to other issues that have nothing whatever to do with renewable energy or global warming, climate change, or anything like that.
That's the way politics has always worked.
It is, that's right. So, you know, if you're a member of the National Rifle Association, you have to ask yourself, what side am I going to come down on in this issue?
Yeah.
And if the National Rifle Association is smart, which I think it is, they're going to say we've got to cut our ties to
There's no connection between guns and wind.
That's right. We have to make that very clear. And at some point, they're going to have to say something like, we are, and you know, I really kind of expect them to say, we believe in the environment, because the National Rifle Association is a very pro-environmental organization. They see the environment from the point of view of the hunter, and the hunter is intimate with the environment.
Yeah, he is.
And so that's how they see it, and they understand that you cannot over-harvest a species and maintain a sustainable situation. They've also been very upset about the fact that, for example, the snow goose could not be harvested because its absolute numbers were low. But what this meant was, because the animals that were predators in the nesting grounds were being destroyed,
snow geese.
the snow goose population was burgeoning, and that population was destroying its nesting sites because there were too many of them, which meant that they were afraid that the nesting sites were going to get destroyed, and then the population would crash and it would never recover.
Wow.
So, you know,
it's a fine balancing act.
It's a fine balancing act, and so this is an organization which is aware of environmentalism and does take part in environmental causes. And I'm kind of expecting the National Rifle Association to come out in favor of renewable power at some point. And when that happens, if it happens, I think it's going to be a watershed experience, because it means that the people who pay attention to that organization, and there are millions of them, many millions of them in fact, are going to start seeing this entire question from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. So now I've spoken.
Their only choice is either keep totally quiet about it or do what you just said, support it.
Yeah, and I think that they're gonna have to. My bet is every year they're kind of looking at this and saying, is it going to be too costly politically to come out in favor of a cause that's seen as being a democratic cause?
Well, yeah, my friend's friend is my friend. My friend's enemy is my enemy.
That's right.
My friend's friend is my friend. My enemy's friend is my enemy.
That's right.
My friend's enemy is my friend.
And here we are talking about this in Vermont. A lot of Vermonters don't know Howard Dean,
Yeah.
who was the governor who ran for president. Is his first name Howard?
Yeah.
Yeah. He kind of really represents Vermont in a way. Here he is, a kind of a moderately liberal Democratic figure who happens to be rated by the National Rifle Association with an A-. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's the way Vermont is, you know. That's the way Vermont is.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And it's kind of, you know, I think what I'm saying is we're seeing a political dynamic set up here, which is at some point going to be changing radically.
Well, I hadn't thought about that, but it seems to make sense. I mean, it's kind of an ideological thing, and it's friends versus enemies, and the day is going to come we're going to say it doesn't pay for us to be enemies with these guys anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that Grassley has been talking about that because he was, and of course from Iowa. A year ago, they were talking about putting a nuclear reactor in Iowa, and I haven't heard any noise about that lately. But they're putting up. Is it Iowa that's more than 25%? I think Iowa is almost 30% wind powered now, isn't it?
I don't know the number, but I do know they got a lot of wind.
They got a lot of wind.
What the heck's the name of the Yellow Brick Road was?
No, that was Kansas.
Kansas, right.
I tell people I was born in Kansas, and I was born right across the street from Dorothy's farm, where everything was black and white. You know, when I was born. She went to Oz, and when she came back, it was all in color.
How about that? This is an interesting thing. That yellow thing on the right is a substation.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's there to get the power that's generated by the
by the
wind
farm
to the shore.
I want to point out to everybody who's looking at this, just to the left of that yellow thing, you'll see something that's kind of white and red in the water. That's not a boat. That's a ship.
Okay. Oh yeah, right. Okay.
This is a ship.
It's not a boat.
Yeah,
yes,
and
right.
the substation, as I recall, the bottom floor of it that you see there's pilings coming up to, that is the bottom floor is 6 stories out of the water. So that thing is about.
It's a pretty big thing.
It's a big thing. That's right. It's very big.
And that cable there that you're seeing is a big cable.
Yeah, I don't know how big that is. Can you describe that in terms of size?
Well, it depends on the voltage, but the minimum size of cable like that would be about 35 kilovolts.
All right, and how big physically is that?
That particular cable, if it's 35 kilovolts, is about 8 inches in diameter.
Okay, so this is 8 inches in diameter. And that is only if it's the smallest size.
Basically, yeah.
How big do they get?
Well, I was in the cable business. And at the time I was in it, 138 kV was the maximum in this country.
Okay.
But the Europeans were working already on 230 kV.
Okay.
Now, that was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was all AC, too. And DC cables will go up to probably now 600 kilovolts.
But how big, how thick are they? These things must be massive.
There's a physical limit as to how big you can handle those things. So I would imagine it's somewhere around a foot in diameter.
A foot in diameter. DC, technology's changed a lot. And when I was in school, one of the things that I remember was somebody saying, well, the reason why we use AC power is because DC power is hard to step from one voltage to another.
Yeah.
And now what I'm reading is
they have new technology.
They have new technology, and DC power can be transmitted at high voltage with much less line loss than AC.
Exactly. And if you got into the really higher voltages with DC power, you wouldn't have 3 conductor cables. You'd have 2 single conductor cables.
Okay.
Because DC.
Okay.
You'd have a plus, a minus, and Earth is in the middle at 0.
Okay.
So you're actually, if you between the 2 conductors, it's 1,400 volts.
Okay.
14,000 volts.
14,000 volts. That sounds like it would fry somebody.
I think vaporize is more more accurate a word.
Yeah.
But this is the technology that they're developing now.
Yeah.
Like I said, when I was in the cable business, 138 kV was the biggest my company could make. And I was involved in a project where we crossed the Hudson River,
Okay.
connected Indian Point with Orange and Rockland Utilities.
Okay.
And the reason for that, it was only going to be a temporary thing. They had a overhead line, high voltage line that they wanted to upgrade. And it was going to be out of commission for a couple of years. So they put in the cable. And I'm sure the cable's still there now as backup. But their concept was to build a new high voltage
Now,
above ground line.
this yellow thing that we see on the screen, that is a substation or a station or a transfer station?
It's basically a substation, taking smaller cables running from each one of these windmills, connecting them all with to a big cable that's taking them to the land.
All right.
So it's, I'm sure it's exactly what we would call a substation.
And this thing is manned. I would imagine a thing that size would have to be manned.
Well, I don't know. We got substations here that aren't manned.
But a thing of that.
There's people available that visit it probably daily.
Yeah.
But I don't know that there's anybody has to be there sitting there like a guy in a lighthouse. And it may be because it's in the sea. Maybe they are.
I would think that even if it was
I'm sure there's living quarters in it.
Yeah, I would think that even if it's just for security purposes, they'd have somebody on there to make sure.
That might make some sense.
Yeah.
Especially in this day and age. So that might make some sense. I really don't know.
Yeah. So you think that thing could conceivably be entirely automated?
There's not much to do. You're not switching these things. It's just a giant, what would you call it? All of these things are interconnected and they stay
I'm sure that there
interconnected.
would be people who would be happy to live on one of those things if you just gave them free cell phone accounts.
So I got another one here that we didn't talk about. The Vermont Winter Olympians.
Oh, yeah.
They call for action on climate change. They had a big meeting in East Montpelier.
Yep.
And what they're afraid of is their children aren't going to have snow.
Yes, well,
That's exactly their point.
yes.
Now they say snow is disappearing and their professional careers are threatened by climate change.
Yes.
After returning from the ski season in Europe, 2014 Olympic Games biathlete Hannah Dreisegacker, excuse me if I mispronounce it,
Well, she's
and other
American.
Vermont Olympians came to the Morse Farm Ski Center in East Montpelier to call for a climate action change. We need to put a price on carbon emissions. When we burn fuel, we're paying for the fuel, and we're not paying for all the damage that the fuel does. You said that earlier.
Yes.
The idea of putting a price on carbon, that suddenly we're paying for what that fuel should actually cost, is that we're suddenly.
And you know it's going to happen sooner or later.
Well, I didn't bring it up. Oh, here it is.
You didn't
I'm talking
bring it up.
about it, but I didn't have that on the screen, I don't think.
You had me on the screen?
I think I did.
What a sad thing.
Yeah, she's prettier than you are.
Most women are much prettier than I am.
Most men are.
Let's just be realistic about this.
And here's. This is an interesting thing. I'll pull this up.
We only have about a minute before
Yeah.
we've gone to 2 hours.
This is again molecular work that nanomolecules that these guys are.
Amazing stuff. We're in a different world.
This is a two-dimensional self-assembling material that might produce solar cells or transistors. It'll grow them themselves. That's the thing that blows my mind. They make this stuff and it gets bigger.
Well, actually, that's what growing crystals is.
Yeah, it is, and that's exactly what they're doing. These things are crystals, but they're very highly specialized crystals.
I used to work many years ago. I worked in a plant where they were making laser rubies, and they had a ruby which was absolutely perfect. It was amazing. It was so beautiful, and it was about 1 inch across and about 1 foot long. And they had grown
a foot long. It was synthetic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And this thing was, it was just a crystal. It was faceted. It was beautiful. And I said, you could sell things like that in the jewelry market. And yeah, the guy said, yeah, we could destroy the jewelry market. We're not going to do that.
Well, General Electric, long time ago, announced they had synthesized diamonds.
Yeah.
And ever since that time, they've always been saying, "Well, we just use it for industrial diamonds."
Yeah, and also they made for the points for the needles for the old vinyl records.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
The diamond points.
And they made a few other things like that.
But they're also a member of the International Diamond Cartel.
Yeah, so. Well, what can I say? Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to say good night, goodbye, good morning, whatever it is, and. If we say good night, it's a 50-50 chance that we're going to be the right time.
Some of this stuff would be shown at night.
Yeah, absolutely.
Say good night, good morning, good day.
So
good afternoon.
It has been a supreme pleasure to be here.
I got to figure out which camera I'm looking at.
Well, anyway, there it is, and we're more or less.
We gone.
We're gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.